Today we are looking at a brilliant game from the legendary New York 1924 tournament, featuring Frank Marshall playing white against Richard Réti. This game is a fascinating clash of chess philosophies. Réti employs the king's Indian defense, utilizing hypermodern concepts to pressure Marshall's classical center. He even sacrifices a pawn to seize the initiative, but Marshall demonstrates incredible defensive resilience and precise endgame technique to secure a hard-fought draw. Let's dive into this captivating positional battle. d4. Knight f6. Knight f3. g6. c4. Bishop g7. Knight c3. Castles kingside. e4. d6. This pawn move prevents white from advancing a knight or pawn to the e5 square, prepares black's possible future e7, e5 advance, and frees the c8 bishop. The development system employed by white here is recognized by some modern masters, such as Grunfeld and Jana, as the best against the king's Indian defense. This system can give white an advantage just like the four pawns attack, but in the latter case, the core of the problem takes on sharper and more definite forms. Bishop d3. This move, however, is not in the spirit of the system, since the subsequent exchange on f3 will weaken the d4 square. Also, the move h3 does not seem to be the best here, primarily for principled reasons. White has no reason to prevent the bishop c8, g4 sortie, because after that black will positionally be forced to exchange the bishops sooner or later, and such predictability of the opponent's actions, which can be taken into account in advance, is an advantage in itself. Furthermore, after the move h3, black has an interesting reply at their disposal. c5 for example. d takes c5. d5, which is probably more correct, opens up the scope for the fianchettoed bishop. Queen a5. c takes d6. Knight takes e4. d takes e7. Rook e8 with an advantage for black. In view of all this, the most natural way to retain an advantage here is the move bishop e2, and if bishop g4, then bishop e3. Bishop g4. Réti's keen eye spots the weakness of the d4 pawn and seizes the moment to exploit it by pinning the knight on f3. Now this unfortunate pawn is left completely defenseless. White is forced to spend a tempo to protect it. h3. Developing the bishop to d3 is so anti-positional that it might have been best to retreat it to e2 now, even at the cost of a tempo. Bishop takes f3. Réti decides to exchange his bishop for the knight, thereby ensuring that the d4 pawn remains weak and unprotected, at least for a while. Queen takes f3. Knight fd7, eyeing the e5 square. Bishop e3. c5. The continuation. Knight c6. d5. Knight ce5 led to a position similar to what occurred in the game. But not. Knight e2 due to e5. d5. Knight d4. d5. Knight e5. Queen e2. Knight takes d3 check. Queen takes d3. Knight d7. Castles kingside. Queen a5 threatening to win a pawn via bishop takes c3 followed by knight d7, e5, and so on. Bishop d2 parrying the threat and simultaneously preparing to exchange black's formidable bishop. a6. Knight d1. Queen c7. Bishop c3. Knight e5. Preparing the following overly bold pawn sacrifice to avoid a draw at all costs. Black would have maintained a good game after. Bishop takes c3. Knight takes c3. Queen a5 with a possible queen a5, b4 if the occasion arises, but, of course, the drawing danger would be high. Queen e2. b5. C takes b5. According to the engine, white should play b3 with a slight advantage for white. A takes b5. f4. White could have safely grabbed this pawn now, as it would be very difficult for black to obtain positional compensation for it. Queen takes b5. c4 apparently, this is the point of the pawn sacrifice. Bishop takes e5. Bishop takes e5. Or rook fb8. Queen c6. Queen takes c6. D takes c6. Bishop takes e5. Rook c1. Bishop takes b2. Rook takes c4 with an advantage for white, because black cannot take the a-pawn due to rook c2, and so on. Knight e3. c3. B takes c3. Queen takes c3. Rook ac1 and white would have at least an easy draw. Conversely, by declining the sacrifice, white has to fight hard to achieve a draw in a fierce battle. Knight c4. Better was b4. Bishop takes e5. D takes e5. Bishop takes g7. King takes g7. Knight c3. Queen a5. a4. It still would have been better to leave the queenside alone and initiate play in the center via e5. The advance of the a-pawn turns out to be fruitless. Queen b4. Knight takes b5. Rook takes a4. Rook takes a4. Queen takes a4. Rook c1. Best here for white was knight c3 and after. Queen b3 to play. Rook f2. Queen takes b5. The move. Knight b6 essentially changed nothing after. Knight a3. Rook takes c4. Rook b8. Rook c2. Queen takes e2. Rook takes e2. Due to the weakness of the b-pawn, it is not easy for white to save the endgame. Marshall accomplished this task in an exemplary manner. Rook b4. King f2. King f8. King f3. Rook d4 in order to play f7, f5, and so on. G4. King E8. Black unexpectedly abandons their idea and thus makes the opponent's task easier. Truth be told, after F5. G takes F5. G takes F5. E takes F5. Rook takes D5. King G4. Rook D1. Rook E6. The possibility of a draw was not excluded, but this continuation, in any case, gave Black more chances than the harmless attempt to transfer the king to the queenside. Rook E3. Rook B4. Now playing. F5 was completely impossible due to E takes F5. G takes F5. G takes F5. Rook takes D5. F6. Rook A3. A saving counterattack. Rook takes B2. Rook A8 check. King D7. Rook A7 check. King D8. E5. D takes E5. F takes E5. C4. King E3. C3. Rook A8 check. King C7. Rook A7 check. King D8. Rook A8 check. King C7. Rook A7 check. Rook B7. Rook A3. After winning the passed pawn, all danger for white disappears. C2. Rook C3 check. King D7. Rook takes C2. Rook B3 check. King D4. Rook takes H3. Rook A2. Rook G3. Trading rooks would now even lead to Black's defeat. Rook B3. Rook A7 check. King D8. Rook A8 check. King C7. Rook A7 check. Rook B7. D6 check. E takes D6. E takes D6 check. King C8. Rook takes B7. King takes B7. G5. King C6. King E5. King D7. King D5 with a win. Rook A7 check. King D8. Rook A8 check. King C7. Rook A7 check. King D8 draw.